There is a level of discipline that makes people uncomfortable just by looking at you. Not because you speak loudly, not because you show off, but because you show up every day. Same time, same work, no excuses, no disappearance. While most modern people live by emotion, walking when they feel like it, resting when they're tired, postponing when it's inconvenient, quitting when it gets boring, you still step forward, quietly, consistently, like a machine that doesn't need motivation. They will call you extreme. They will say you're not normal. But the truth is simple. Only the undisciplined need to label discipline as too much. Miyamoto Musashi, a man with no master, no school, no reliance on anyone, lived his entire life as a warrior. Even without a battlefield, he didn't train to defeat others. He trained so he would never lose to himself. He believed in structure. He didn't trust inspiration. He trusted repetition until there was no other option. The way of the warrior never asks, should I do it today? That question belongs only to those who are unprepared. Curious. Only one thing. Who am I? And am I acting in alignment with that identity? Modern people aren't weak because they lack intelligence. They're weak because they negotiate with themselves every day. Every morning becomes a courtroom. Every decision, a debate. And every compromise allows the old self to win again. This video is not for everyone. It's not for those looking for hacks, tricks, or short-term motivation. This is the path of discipline that scares people, not because it's violent, but because it is unbreakably consistent. Once you enter this level of discipline, you no longer ask whether to act or not. There is only one state left, action. If you're ready to hear things aren't comfortable, if you're willing to kill the version of yourself that keeps quitting, then continue. And if you turn on notification because what comes next won't break a bow. Turn the batcave to pro pass picoren video pid unbreakable. Discipline is identity, not effort. There is a dangerous misunderstanding about discipline. People think discipline is something you apply, like pressure, like force, like willpower clenched through pain. That is why they fail. True discipline is not something you do. It is something you are. Miyamoto Musashi never woke up asking himself whether he felt like training. That question never existed because questions only appear when identity is unclear. A man who tries to be disciplined must decide every day. A man who is disciplined simply moves. This is the difference between effort and essence. Effort negotiates. Essence executes. In the Dokojo, Musashi wrote about not relying on the body, not relying on pleasure, not relying on comfort. What he was really saying was this: do not rely on temporary states to govern permanent actions. Emotion changes, energy fluctuates, motivation decays, identity does not. When discipline is based on motivation, you are at the mercy of your mood. When discipline is based on identity, your mood becomes irrelevant. A warrior does not train because he feels strong. He trains because that is what a warrior does. This is why most people collapse by the third week. They are running on borrowed fuel, excitement, hope, external pressure. Once that fuel burns out, there is nothing underneath. Musashi builds discipline the same way he builds mastery with the sword, by removing choice. Not choosing to train, not choosing to endure, not choosing to continue. Those were already decided. The moment discipline becomes optional, it becomes fragile. and fragile systems always break under stress. Ask yourself this. Are you someone who does discipline or someone who cannot live any other way? Because the scariest level of discipline is not intensity, it is inevitability. When your actions are no longer up for debate, when your habits no longer ask for permission, when quitting is not a consideration. That is when discipline stops looking impressive and starts looking terrifying. And most people will never reach that level because it requires one brutal decision to stop seeing discipline as a task and start accepting it as your identity. Fix the time, eliminating when. Most people don't fail because they refuse to act. They fail because they delay deciding when, morning or night, before work or after, now, or just a little later. That question alone drains more discipline than fatigue ever could. Miyamoto Musashi never allowed time to become a debate. In combat, there is no later. There's only now or defeat. In the Book of Earth, Nu Luntudia, Musashi emphasizes foundation. A house collapses not because the roof is weak, but because the base is unstable. Time is that base. When your practice floats across the day, your discipline has no gravity. It drifts. It negotiates. It escapes. Fixed time is not about productivity. It is about removing choice. The moment you lock an action to a specific hour, your brain loses one of its favorite weapons. Delay. No more asking, when should I do it? That decision has already been buried. A warrior does not choose when to stand guard. He stands when the watch begins. People believe flexibility is freedom. But Musashi knew something harsher. Flexibility without structure leads to weakness. When time is flexible, excuses multiply. When time is fixed, excuses starve. The power of fixed time is brutal in its simplicity. It turns discipline from a daily decision into a scheduled event. No mood check, no energy assessment, no negotiation with the self. The hour arrives, the body moves. This is why true discipline often looks mechanical, robotic, unemotional, and that is exactly why it works. Emotion rises and falls, time does not. When you bind your actions to time instead of feeling, you stop living reactively. You start living by command. Musashi trained not when it felt optimal, but when it was non-negotiable. Because in battle, conditions are never perfect, and neither is life. Ask yourself this: is there a time in your day that is untouchable, a time where action happens regardless of circumstance? If not, then discipline is still optional. And optional discipline we always abandon you. Fixed form, eliminating what? Once time is no longer negotiable, the mind looks for a new escape. If it can't argue about when, it will argue about what. What should I do today? Should I change it up? Maybe something lighter, maybe something more effective. This is not optimization. This is resistance. Wearing a smarter mask. Miyamoto Musashi warned against this without ever saying it directly. In the Book of Water, he spoke about flow, but not chaos. Flow comes from mastery of form, not from endless variation. A sword strike changes only when the warrior has earned the right to change it. Until then, the form stays the same. Most people mistake variety for progress, but variety is where consistency dies. Every new option creates a micro-decision. Every micro-decision reopens negotiation, and every negotiation weakens discipline. Fixed form is ruthless. Same action, same sequence, same order. Not because it's exciting, but because it is unavoidable. When the form is fixed, the mind loses another hiding place. There's nothing to choose, nothing to customize, nothing to improve, only execution. Musashi did not practice many paths at once. He walked one path until it became part of his bones. Only then did he understand all paths. This is why fixed form feels oppressive at first. The mind screams for novelty. It demands simulation. It accuses you of being rigid, robotic, lifeless. That voice is not intuition. It is the old self fighting for survival, because once form is fixed, discipline no longer depends on intelligence. It depends on obedience, your own structure. And obedience is something modern people hate, especially obedience to themselves. But here is the truth. Freedom comes after form, not before it. Without form, your discipline dissolves into preferences. With form, your actions become inevitable. Ask yourself, do you change your method often because it's truly necessary, or because repetition makes you uncomfortable? Because the scariest discipline is not creative, not flexible, not expressive. It is simple, identical, relentless. Practice without caps. Most people don't quit loudly, they quit quietly. One skip day, one exception, one break that was never meant to be permanent. And just like that, the chain snaps. Miyamoto Musashi understood something brutal about continuity. Once a rhythm is broken, the old self returns immediately. In the Book of Fire, Musashi speaks about momentum in combat. When pressure is applied, it must not stop. The moment you hesitate, the advantage disappears. Discipline works the same way. It does not demand perfection, it demands continuity. Modern thinking is poisoned by the lie of all or nothing. If I can't do it properly, I won't do it at all. If I can't give mocham I'll wait. That mindset doesn't protect discipline. It kills it. A warrior does not abandon the battlefield because his armor is cracked. He adjusts his stance and keeps moving. Practice without gaps means this. Even when conditions collapse, the practice continues, smaller, quieter, imperfect, but unbroken. Musashi did not train only on good days. He trained in exhaustion, in illness, in uncertainty. Because discipline that depends on ideal conditions is not discipline. It is convenience. Gaps are dangerous, not because you rest, but because rest without intention turns into retreat. There is a difference between recovery and avoidance. Recovery strengthens tomorrow's action. Avoidance erases today's identity. Once a gap appears, the mind remembers who it used to be. The negotiator returns. The excuses regain their voice. But when practice continues, even at Mui Pansen, even stripped down to the minimum, identity stays intact. You are no longer someone who used to practice. You remain someone who does. This is why discipline at this level looks obsessive to outsiders. They don't see the rule you live by. Never let the chain break. Not because you are extreme, but because you understand how fragile momentum truly is. Ask yourself, when life disrupts your routine, do you disappear or do you adapt without stopping? Because the scariest discipline is not relentless intensity. It is uninterrupted existence. So, discipline. In solitude, there is a level of discipline that only exists when no one is watching, no audience, no praise, no accountability partner, no one to impress. This is where most people collapse. They perform well in public. They stay consistent when someone is counting, but the moment they are alone, structure dissolves. Miyamoto Musashi lived most of his discipline in isolation. He did not train to be seen. He trained to be prepared in the way of a sword. True mastery is forged far from spectators. Because applause teaches nothing, silence does. Solitude strips discipline down to its core. Without witnesses, there is no social pressure to lean on. Only identity remains. This is why solitude is dangerous for the undisciplined. It exposes the truth. When no one is watching, do you still act or do you disappear? Musashi warned against seeking validation. In Do-Curse, he rejected dependence on others' approval. Because approval weakens resolve. It teaches you to act for reaction, not for principle. Discipline that needs recognition is fragile. The moment recognition fades, so does effort. But discipline rooted in solitude becomes terrifying because it cannot be negotiated away by comfort. It cannot be bribed by praise. It cannot be discouraged by indifference. A warrior alone with his sword does not slack off, he sharpens it. Solitude turns discipline inward. It removes performance. What remains is truth. This is why disciplined people often seem distant, not cold, but self-contained. They are not driven by attention. They are driven by alignment. Ask yourself this. If everything you do were invisible, no credit, no acknowledgement, would your discipline survive? Because the scariest level of discipline does not announce itself. It operates quietly, relentlessly, unseen. By rejecting normality at some point, discipline stops feeling hard and starts feeling alien to others. People begin to look at you differently. They say you're too strict, too intense, too obsessed. They say that's not normal. Miyamoto Musashi never tried to be normal. Normal people follow crowds. A swordsman studies distance from others, from noise, from distraction. In the Book of Wind, Musashi warned against copying the ways of other schools. When you move like everyone else, you inherit their weaknesses. Normal behavior produces normal results, and normal results are exactly what the disciplined refuse. Here is the truth most people won't admit. They are uncomfortable around disciplined individuals because discipline exposes excuses. Your consistency becomes a mirror, and not everyone wants to see themselves clearly. So they try to soften you. They suggest balance. They recommend rest you didn't ask for. They tell you to relax, not because you are wrong, but because your presence disrupts their comfort. A warrior understands this phase. Isolation is not punishment. It is proof of alignment. When you stop needing permission to be different, discipline hardens. Musashi walked his path alone, not out of arrogance but out of clarity. He knew that standing firm would make others uneasy, and he accepted that cost. Ask yourself, are you willing to be misunderstood in exchange for becoming unbreakable? Because the scariest discipline does not blend in. It stands apart. Pre-decided response. Wing before chaos. Most discipline doesn't fail during routine. It fails during disruption. The late night, the unexpected problem, the day that collapses without warning. In those moments, people don't quit because they are weak. They quit because they are unprepared. Miyamoto Musashi understood this at the deepest level. A warrior does not improvise under pressure. He pre-decides. In combat, the strike is not chosen in the moment of danger. It was chosen long before the enemy appeared. This is the meaning of winning before the fight. When chaos arrives and you must decide what to do, discipline is already compromised. Decision under stress always favors comfort. Pre-decided responses remove that weakness. If X happens, I do Y. No thinking, no debate, no emotion. Musashi trained for broken terrain, poor visibility, uneven footing, not because those conditions were ideal, but because reality is never ideal. Life is the same. Discipline that depends on smooth days will collapse the moment friction appears, but discipline with pre-resolved answers becomes brutal. It does not pause to ask what to do, it executes. This is why true discipline looks calm in crisis. The mind is not searching, the body already knows. Ask yourself, when your routine is attacked, do you freeze or do you already know your next move? Because the scariest discipline does not react to chaos. It has already decided. Automation. When willpower disappears at the highest level, discipline no longer feels heavy, it feels inevitable. This is where most people misunderstand mastery. They imagine constant struggle, endless effort, permanent tension. Musashi knew better. In the Book of Void, he points toward a state where action happens without conscious command. The sword moves before thought interferes. This is not laziness. This is automation. When an action is repeated in the same time, the same form, without gaps. The body learns faster than the mind. Eventually, the mind stops arguing because it is no longer needed. Willpower is a limited resource. Automation is not. This is why beginners burn out. They rely on masters rely on structure. A warrior who still needs motivation has not trained enough. When discipline reaches automation, you don't feel heroic. You don't feel inspired. You simply move. This is the most frightening stage for outsiders. They can't see effort anymore. They only see consistency. They ask, "How do you do this every day?" The answer disappoints them. You don't. It happens. Musashi's movements look effortless, not because they were easy, but because the decision had died long ago. Automation is the death of hesitation, the death of internal drama, the death of excuses. Ask yourself, are your habits still asking for permission? Or have they become automatic enough to survive your worst days? Because the final form of discipline is not strength, it is silence. Final part, death of the old self. There is one thing no one warns you about. When discipline reaches its final stage, it doesn't just change your schedule. It doesn't just change your habits. It kills a version of you, the version that negotiated, the version that needed comfort, the version that waited to feel ready. Miyamoto Musashi understood this better than most. A swordsman does not add strength forever. At some point, something must die. In the way of the warrior, death is not only physical, it is psychological. The death of excuses, the death of identity built on weakness, the death of the self that quits quietly. This is why true discipline feels disturbing to others. They sense that something in you is no longer like them. You no longer complain the same way. You no longer seek permission. You no longer explain yourself. And that silence unsettles people. Musashi lived without attachment to comfort, without attachment to praise, without attachment even to life itself. Not because he wanted to die, but because only someone who has accepted death can live without fear. The scariest level of discipline is not strictness, it is finality. There is no backup plan. No, if this doesn't work, no return to the old self. You cross a line where quitting is not an option, not because you're forcing yourself, but because that person no longer exists. People will say you've changed. They'll be right, but they'll misunderstand why you didn't become better, you became different, and that difference is what makes your discipline frightening, not loud, not aggressive, just unmoving. So, here is the final question, not for motivation, not for inspiration, but for truth. Are you still trying to be disciplined? Or are you ready to let your old self die and live as someone who cannot quit? If you choose the second, there is no applause at the end, only silence and strength. If this path speaks to you, stay with life philosophy. We don't offer comfort here, we offer transformation, and that is never gentle. はい、じゃあ。Cutting off internal negotiation. Every collapse begins with something very small, not loud, not dramatic, just a silent negotiation inside the mind. Maybe later, I'm too tired today. One day won't matter. I'll make it up tomorrow. That is where discipline dies. Miyamoto Musashi understood this deeply. In swordsmanship, the most dangerous moment is not when the opponent is stronger, but when the mind hesitates. Half a second of doubt, the sword isn't even drawn yet, and the battle is already lost. Internal negotiation works the same way. It doesn't destroy you instantly. It slows your life's reflexes little by little. Modern people believe that thinking more means being smart, but in discipline, overthinking is a fatal weakness. Every time you allow yourself to weigh options, do it or not, now or later, enough or just a bit more, you hand control over to emotion. Musashi never allowed the mind to sit in command. He placed principle in control of the sword. Principle does not negotiate. Principle does not get tired. Principle does not ask why today should be different from yesterday. When an action still needs a reason to be done, that action does not belong to you yet. Most people fail not because they don't know what to do, but because they reopen the meeting with themselves every single day. They live like a debating committee, endless discussion, no final decision. A warrior is different. The decision is made before emotion shows up. When the time arrives, the action happens. No explanation, no convincing, no permission asked from the self. Musashi called this winning before the fight, not defeating the opponent, but defeating hesitation within the mind. The moment you cut off internal negotiation, something strange happens. Freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom from the exhaustion of constant decision-making. The scariest discipline isn't about how much you do. It's about this single fact. You no longer allow yourself not to act. From that moment on, discipline is no longer a battle. It becomes your default state.